Section 26 of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 26. At the house of Bonnardin, the actor. In the Place d'Anvers, Fandor was passing Rokin College. He heard someone calling him. "Monsieur Fandor! Monsieur Fandor!" It was Josephine, breathless and panting, her bright eyes glowing with joy. Fandor turned, astonished. "What is up?" Josephine paused a second, then taking Fandor's hand familiarly drew him into the square, which at this time of day was almost deserted. "Oh, it's something out of the common, I can assure you. I am going to astonish you." "You've done that already. The mere sight of you!" "You thought I was arrested, didn't you?" Fandor nodded. "Well, it's your Juve who is jugged." Contrary to Josephine's expectation, Fandor did not appear very astonished. "Come now, Miss Josephine, that's a likely tale. Juve arrested? On what grounds?" Josephine began an incoherent story. "I tell you, they squabbled like rag pickers. 'You make justice ridiculous,' shouted Fuselier. 'No one has the right to commit such blunders.' Well, they kept going on like that for a quarter of an hour, and then Fuselier rang, and 2 municipal guards came, and he said, 'Arrest that man there,' pointing to Juve, and your friend the detective was obliged to let them do it. Only as he left the room he gave Fuselier such a look. Believe me, between those two it is war to the death from now." When she had ended, Fandor asked in a calm voice: "And how did you get away, Josephine?" "Oh, Monsieur Fuselier was very nice. 'It's you again?' said he, when he saw me. 'To be sure it is,' answered I, 'and I'm glad to meet you again, Monsieur Magistrate.' Then he began to hold forth about the cinema business. I told him what I knew about it, what I told you. Loupart stuffed me up with his tale of a trap. As sure as my name's Josephine, I believed what my lover told me." Fandor gave her a penetrating glance. "And how about the Dixon business?" Josephine coloured, and said in a low tone: "Oh, the Dixon business! As to that, we are very good pals, Dixon and I. Just fancy, I went to see him yesterday afternoon. He has taken a fancy to me. He promised to keep me in luxury. Ah, if I dared!" sighed the girl. "You would do well to leave Loupart." "Leave Loupart? Especially now that Juve is in quod? Loupart will be the king of Paris." "Do you think your lover will attach much weight to the arrest of Juve? Won't he fancy it's a put-up job?" "A put-up job? How could it be? Why, I saw with my 2 eyes Juve led away with the bracelets on his wrists." The growing hubbub of the newsboys crying the evening papers drew near the place of d'Anvers. Instinctively, Fandor, followed by Josephine, went toward them. On the boulevard, he bought a paper. "There, you see!" cried Josephine triumphantly. "Here it is in print, so it is true." In scare headlines appeared this notice: "Amazing development in the affair of the outlaws of La Chapelle. Detective Juve under lock and key." Fandor, when he met Josephine on the Place d'Anvers, was on his way to the rue des Abbesses, where Bonnardin occupied a nice little suite of 3 rooms, tastefully decorated and comfortably furnished. The actor had his shoulder in plaster. Juve's bullet had broken his clavicle, but the doctor declared that with a few days' rest he would be quite well again. "Monsieur Fandor, I'm very sorry for what is happening to Monsieur Juve. Do you think if I were to declare my intention not to proceed against him?" Fandor cut his companion short. "Let justice take its course, Monsieur Bonnardin. There will always be time later on." Although Monsieur Bonnardin was only 25, he was beginning to have some reputation. By hard work he had come rapidly to the front, and was fast gaining a position among the best interpreters of modern comedy. "My dream," he exclaimed to Fandor, "is one day to attain the fame of my masters, of such men as Tézide, Gémier, Valgrand and Dumény." "You know Valgrand?" asked Fandor. Bonnardin smiled. "Why, we were great friends. When I first made my appearance at the theatre after the Conservatoire, Valgrand was my model, my master. You certainly don't recollect it, Monsieur Fandor, but I played the lover in the famous play La Touche Sanglante, for which Valgrand had made himself up exactly like Gurn, the murderer of Lord Beltham. You must have heard of the case." Fandor pretended to tax his memory. "Why, to be sure, I do recall certain incidents, but won't you refresh my memory?" Bonnardin asked no better than to chatter. Valgrand, on the first night of his presentation of Gurn, was quite worn out, and left the theatre very late. He did not come again. For the second performance, his understudy took his part. The following day, they sent to Valgrand's rooms. He had not been there for 2 days. The third day from the first night, Valgrand came among us again. "Pray go on. You interest me immensely." Valgrand came back, but he had gone mad. He managed to get to his dressing room after taking the wrong door. "I don't know a single word of my part," he confessed to me. I comforted him as best I could, but he flung himself down on his couch and he shook his head helplessly at me. "I have been very ill, Bonnardin." Then suddenly he demanded: "Where is Charlotte?" Charlotte was his dresser. I remembered now that Charlotte had not returned to the theatre since his master's disappearance. His body was found later in the rue Messier. He had been murdered. I did not want to mention this to him for fear it might upset him still more, so I advised my old friend to wait for me till the end of the play and let me keep him company. I intended to take him home and fetch a doctor. Valgrand assented readily. I was then obliged to leave him hurriedly. They were calling me. It was my cue. When I returned, Valgrand had vanished. He had left the theatre. We were not to see him again. "A sad affair," commented Fandor. Bonnardin continued his narrative. "Shortly afterwards, in a deserted house in the rue Messier, near Boulevard Arago, the police found the body of a murdered man. The corpse was easily identified. It was that of Charlotte, Valgrand's dresser." "How did he come there? The house had no porter. The owner, an old peasant, knew nothing." "Well, what do you conclude from this?" asked Fandor. "My theory is that Valgrand murdered his dresser for some reason unknown to us. Then, overcome by his crime, he went mad and committed suicide. Of that there is no doubt." "Oh," muttered Fandor, a little taken aback by this unexpected assertion. The journalist, though he had closely followed the actor's account, was far from drawing the same conclusions. For, in fact, Gurn, Lord Beltham's murderer, whom Fandor believed to be Fantomas, had certainly got Valgrand executed in his stead. The Valgrand who came back to the theatre 3 days after the execution was not the real one, but the man who had taken his place. Gurn, the criminal, Gurn, Fantomas. Ah, that was a stroke of the true Fantomas sort. It was certain that if Valgrand's disappearance had been simultaneous with Gurn's execution, there might have been suspicions. Gurn, Fantomas, then found it necessary to show Valgrand living to witnesses, so that these could swear that the real Valgrand had not died instead of Gurn. But Valgrand was an actor. Gurn, Fantomas, was not. Not enough of one at least to venture to take the place on the boards of such a consummate player, such a famous tragedian. "And that was the end?" asked Fandor. "The end? No," declared the actor. "Valgrand was married and had a son. As is often the case with artists, the Valgrand marriage was not a success, and Madame, a singer of talent, was separated from her husband and travelled much abroad. About a year after these sad occurrences, I had a visit from her. On her way through Paris, she had come to draw the allowance made her by her husband, to supply not only her own wants, but also those of her son, of whom she had the custody. Madame Valgrand chatted with me for hours together. I recounted to her at length what I have had the honour of telling you, and it seemed to me that she gave no great credence to my words. Not that she threw doubts on my statements, but she kept reiterating: 'That is not like him. I know Valgrand never would have behaved in such a way.' But I never could get her to say exactly what she thought. Some weeks after this first visit, I saw her again. Matters were getting complicated. There was no certificate of her husband's death. Her men of business made his absence a pretext. She no longer drew a cent of her allowance, and yet people knew that Valgrand had left a pretty large amount, and it was in the bank or with a lawyer, I forget which. You are aware, Monsieur Fandor, that when the settling of accounts, or questions of inheritance or wills, come to the fore, there is no end to them." "That is a fact," replied Fandor. "We must believe," went on Bonnardin, "that the matter was important in Madame Valgrand's eyes, for she refused fine offers from abroad and planted herself in Paris, living on her savings. The good woman evidently had a double object: to recover the inheritance for her son, little René, and also to get at the truth touching her husband's fate. She evidently cherished the hope that her husband was not guilty of the dresser's murder, that perhaps he was not even dead, that he would get over his madness if ever they managed to find him. In short, Monsieur Fandor, some 6 or 7 months ago, when I had quite ceased to think of these events, I found myself face to face with Madame Valgrand on the boulevard. I had some difficulty in recognizing her, for my friend's widow was no longer dressed like the Parisian smart woman. Her hair was plastered down and drawn tightly back, her garments were plain and humble, her dress almost neglected. No doubt the poor woman had experienced cruel disappointments. "Good day, Madame Valgrand," I cried, moving toward her with outstretched hands. She stopped me with a gesture. "Hush!" she breathed. "There is no Madame Valgrand now. I am a companion." And the unhappy woman explained that to earn her living she had to accept an inferior position as reader and housekeeper to a rich lady. "And to whom did Madame Valgrand go as companion?" "To an Englishwoman, I believe, but the name escapes me." "Madame Valgrand wished, you say, that her identity should remain unknown? Do you know what name she took?" "Yes, Madame Raymond." Some moments later, Fandor left the actor, and was hastening down the rue Lepic as fast as his legs would take him. End of Chapter 26. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. 7 of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 27. The Mother Superior. "The Mother Superior, if you please." The door shut automatically upon Fandor. He was in the little inner court of the small convent, face to face with a sister, who gazed in alarm at the unexpected guest. The journalist persisted: "Can I see the Mother Superior?" "Well, sir, yes no, I think not." The worthy nun evidently did not know what to say. Finally, making up her mind, she pointed to a passage, and, drawing aside to let the journalist pass, said: "Be good enough to go in there and wait a few moments." Fandor was ushered into a large, plain and austere room, doubtless the parlour of the community. At the windows hung long white curtains, while before the half dozen armchairs lay tiny rugs of matting. The floor, very waxed, was slippery to the tread. The journalist regarded curiously the walls upon which were hung here and there religious figures or chromos of an edifying kind. Above the chimney hung a great crucifix of ebony. But for the noise from without, the passing of the trains and motors, and were it not also for the fine savour of cooking and roast onions, one might have thought oneself 100 leagues from the world in the peaceful calm of this little convent. Fandor, on leaving Bonnardin, had decided to fulfil without delay a pious mission given him by Juve's victim. Taken in at the time of his accident by the sisters of the rue Charmilles, Bonnardin had received from them the first aid his condition required; and as he had left them without a word of thanks, he had begged Fandor to return and hand them on his behalf a 50-franc bill for their poor. After some minutes the door opened and a nun appeared. She greeted Fandor with a slight movement of the head, while the journalist bowed deferentially before her. "Have I the honour of speaking to the Mother Superior?" "Our mother sends her excuses," murmured the nun, "for not being able to receive you at this moment. However, I can take her place, sir. I am in charge of the finances of the house." "I bring you news, sister." The nun clasped her hands. "Good news, I hope. How is the poor young man doing?" "As well as can be expected. The ball was extracted without trouble by the doctors." "I shall thank Saint Comus, the patron saint of surgeons. And his assailant, surely he will be well punished?" Fandor smiled. "His assailant was the victim of a terrible misconception. He is a most upright man." "Then I will pray to Saint Yves, the patron saint of advocates, to get him out of his difficulty." "Well," cried Fandor, "since you have so many saints at command, sister, you would do well to point out to me one who might favour the efforts of the police in their struggle with the ruffians." The nun was a woman of sense who understood a joke. She rejoined: "You might try Saint George, sir, the patron saint of warriors." Then, becoming serious again, the sister made an end of the interview. "Our Mother Superior will be much touched, sir, when I report the kind step you have taken in coming here to us." "Allow me, sister," broke in Fandor. "My mission is not over yet." Here the journalist discreetly proffered the note. "This is from Monsieur Bonnardin, for your poor." The nun was profuse in her thanks, and looking at Fandor with a touch of malice: "You may perhaps smile, sir, if I say I shall thank Saint Martin, the patron saint of the charitable. In any case, I shall do it with my whole heart." The soft sound of a bell came from the distance. The sister instinctively turned her head and looked through the windows at the inner cloister of the convent. "The bell calls you, no doubt, sister?" he inquired. "It is indeed the hour of vespers." Fandor, followed by the sister, left the parlour and reached the outer gate. Already the porter was about to open it for him when he pulled up short. Moving at a measured pace, one behind the other, the ladies of the community crossed the courtyard, going toward the chapel at the far end of the garden. "Sister," Fandor inquired anxiously, "who is that nun who walks at the head?" "That is our Holy Mother Superior." Fandor was lucky enough to find a taxi as he left the little convent, into which he jumped. He was immersed in such deep reflections that when the taxi stopped, he was quite surprised to find himself in rue Bonaparte, when he had meant to go up to Bonnardin's and expected to reach Montmartre. "Where did I tell you to go?" he asked the driver. The man looked at his fare in amazement. "To the address you gave me, I suppose." Fandor did not reply, but paid his fare. "Heaven inspires me," he thought. "To be sure, I wanted to see Bonnardin and tell him I had done his commission; but it was to prove, I should have gone after what I found out at the convent." The journalist remained motionless on the pavement, without seeming to feel the jostling of the passers by. He stood there with his eyes fixed on the ground, his mind lost in a dream. He had unconsciously gone back several years to his mysterious childhood, stormy and restless. He went over again in thought this last affair, which had once more brought him so intimately into Juve's life, the abominable crime in the Cité Fourchot, in which Chaleck and Loupart were involved, and behind them Fantômas, the crime of which the victim, as Juve had already established, was no other than Lady... He quickly entered the house and rushed up the stairs, but halted on the landing. "What have I come here for? If I am to believe the papers, Juve is under lock and key. It must be instinct that guides me. I feel that I am going to see Juve. Besides, I must." He did not ring, for he enjoyed the unique favour of a key which allowed him to enter Juve's place at will. He entered and went straight to the study. It was empty. He then cried out: "Juve! Many things have happened since I had the pleasure of seeing you. Be good enough to let me into your office. I have 2 words to say to you." But Fandor's words fell dead in the silence of the apartment. After this summons, he made his way into the office, and ensconced himself in an armchair. Clearly, Fandor was assured his friend had heard him. And he was not wrong. 2 seconds later, lifting a curtain that hid a secret entrance to the study, Juve appeared. "You speak as if you knew I was here." The 2 men looked at each other, and burst into shouts of laughter. "So you understood it was all a put-up affair, intended to make our opponents believe that for a time I was powerless to hurt them. What do you think of my notion?" "First rate," replied Fandor. "The more so that the fair Josephine saw with her own eyes some of the force taking you off to prison." "Everybody believe it, don't they?" "Everybody." "Look here, you spoke just now as though you knew I was here?" Fandor smiled. "The odour of hot smoke is easily distinguished from the dankness of cold tobacco." Juve approved. "Well done, Fandor. Here, for your pains, roll a cigarette and let's talk. Have you anything fresh?" "Yes, and a lot, too." Fandor related the talk he had had with Bonnardin touching Valgrand the actor, and Madame Valgrand, alias Madame Raymond. Juve uttered his reflections aloud. "This is one riddle the more to solve. I still adhere to the theory that Josephine, some months ago, was brought into intimate relations with Lady Beltham, whose body I discovered at Cité Fourchot, and later identified." Fandor sprang up and placed both of his hands upon Juve's shoulders. "Lady Beltham is not dead. She is alive. As surely as my name's Fandor, the superior of the convent at Nogent is Lady Beltham." End of chapter 27. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. 8 of The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Silvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 28. An Old Paralytic. At the far end of the rue de Rome, Fandor halted. "After all," he thought, "maybe I am going straight into a trap. Who sent me the letter? Who is this Monsieur Mahon? I never heard of him. Why is this menacing phrase, 'Come if you take any interest in the affairs of Lady B and F.' Oh, if only I could take counsel of Juve!" But for the last fortnight, since the ill-starred affair of Nogent, and the almost incredible discovery he had made that Lady Beltham was still alive, Fandor had not seen Juve. He had been to the Sûreté a number of times, but Juve had vanished. Fandor stopped before a private house on the boulevard Perrier North. He passed in through the outer hall and reached the porter's lodge. "Madame, have you a tenant here named Mahon?" The porteress came forward. "Monsieur Mahon? To be sure, 5th floor on the right." "Thank you. I should like to ask a few questions about him. I have come to negotiate an insurance policy for him, and I should like to know about the value of the furniture in his rooms. What sort of a man is this Monsieur Mahon? About how old is he?" Fandor had, by pure professional instinct, found the best device in the world. There is not a porteress who has not many times enlightened insurance agents. "Why, sir, Monsieur Mahon has lived here only a month or 6 weeks. He can scarcely be very well off, for when he moved in I did not see any fine furniture go up. I believe, for that matter, he is an old cavalry officer, and in the army nowadays folks scarcely make fortunes." "That's true enough," assented Fandor. "Anyhow, he is a very charming man, an ideal lodger. To begin with, he is infirm, almost paralysed in both legs. I believe he never goes out of an evening. And then, he never has any visitors except 2 young fellows who are serving their time in the army." "Are they with him now?" "No, sir. They never come till 3 or 4 in the afternoon." Fandor slipped a coin into the woman's hand and went upstairs. He rang at the door, and was surprised at a strange, soft, rolling sound. "Oh, I know," he thought. "The poor man must move about his rooms in a rubber-tired wheel chair." He was not mistaken. Scarcely was the door opened when he caught sight of an old man of much distinction, seated in a wheel chair. This invalid greeted the journalist pleasantly. "Monsieur Fandor?" "The same, sir." Monsieur Mahon pushed forward his chair and motioned to his visitor to come in. Fandor entered a room in which the curtains were closely drawn and which was brilliantly illuminated with electric lights, although it was the middle of the afternoon. Was it a trap? The journalist instinctively hesitated in the doorway, but behind him a cordial voice called: "Come in, you all kinds of an idiot!" The door clicked behind him, and the invalid, getting out of his chair, burst into a fit of laughter. "Juve! Juve!" "As you see." "Bah! What farce are you playing here? Why this lit up room?" "All for very good reasons. If you will be kind enough to take a seat, I will explain." Fandor dropped into a chair, staring at Juve, who continued: "When you came back the other day and told me that unlikely yarn about Lady Beltham being alive, I decided to try new methods. First of all, I became a cavalry officer. Then I got this wheel chair and moved into this apartment." As Juve paused, Fandor, more and more amazed, inquired: "But your reason for all this?" "Just wait. The day after the Dixon business, I put 3 of my best men on the track of the American. I had a notion he would want to see Josephine again, and I was not mistaken. She came back to justify herself in his eyes. The story ended as might have been foreseen. Michel, who brought me the news, said that Josephine had agreed to become Dixon's mistress." "The deuce!" "Oh, there is nothing to be surprised at that. Michel made arrangements to learn all the details. Josephine is to live at 33C in Boulevard Perrier South, that is, to the right of the railway line, 4th floor. Here we are at 24B Boulevard Perrier North, to the left of the railway, 5th floor, just opposite." "And what does this old Monsieur Mahon do, Juve?" Juve smiled. "You are going to see, my lad." He settled himself again in the wheel chair, drew a heavy rug over his knees, and became once more the old invalid. "My dear friend, will you open the door for me?" Fandor laughingly complied, and Juve wheeled himself into another room.
You see, I have plenty of air here, thanks to this balcony upon which I can wheel my chair. Would you be good enough to pass me that spyglass?" Juve pointed the glass toward the far end of Boulevard Perrier, in the direction of Poste Milat. "Milady Josephine has lately had a craze for keeping her nails polished." "But you are not looking toward the house opposite, you are looking in a contrary direction." Juve laid his spyglass on his knees and laughed. "I expected you to make that remark. See, those glasses at the end are only for show. Inside is a whole system of prisms. With this perspective you see not in front of you, but on one side. In other words, when I pointed at the far end of the boulevard, what I am really looking at is the house opposite." Fandor was about to congratulate his friend on this new specimen of his ingenuity, but Juve did not give him time. He startled the journalist by suddenly asking him: "Tell me, do you love the army?" "Why?" "Because I think those two soldiers you see over there are coming." "To see you," added Fandor. "How do you know?" "From your portress." "You pumped her?" "I did. I got her to talk a bit about that excellent Monsieur Mahon." Juve laughed. "Confound you!" With a quick movement, Fandor, at the detective's request, drew back the wheel chair and shut the window. "You understand," explained Juve, "there is nothing to surprise my neighbours in my having two soldiers to visit me. But I don't care for third persons to hear what they say to me." There was a ring at the apartment door. "Go and open, Fandor. I don't leave my cripple's chair for them. People can see through the curtains." Shown in by Fandor, the soldiers shook hands with Juve and took seats opposite him. "Do you recognise Michel and Léon?" "Oh, perfectly!" cried Fandor. "But why this disguise?" "Because no heed is paid to uniforms. There are soldiers everywhere, and also it is not easy to recognise a civilian suddenly appearing in uniform. What is fresh, Michel?" "Something pretty serious, sir. According to your instructions, we have been shadowing the Superior of the Nogent Convent." "Well, what have you discovered?" "Every Tuesday evening the Superior leaves Nogent and goes to Paris." "Where?" "To one of the branches of her religious house in the Boulevard Jourdan." "Number 180?" Michel was dumbfounded. "Yes, sir. You knew?" "No," said Juve coldly. "What does she do at this branch?" "There are 4 or 5 old nuns there. The Superior spends Tuesday right there, and on Wednesday goes back to Nogent about 1 in the afternoon." "And you know no more than that?" "No, sir. Must we go on with the shadowing?" "No, it is not worth while. Return to the Prefecture and report to Monsieur Havard." When the two men had left, Fandor turned to Juve. "What do you make of it?" Juve shrugged his shoulders. "Michel is an idiot. That house has 2 exits, one to the boulevard, the other to waste ground that leads to the fortifications. The Superior, or Lady Beltham, goes there to change her dress, and then hastens to some prearranged meeting elsewhere. The house at Neuilly will bear watching." End of chapter 28. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. 29 of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 29. Through the Window. "What a splendid fellow! One can count on him at any time. A friendship like his is rare and precious." Fandor had just left Juve, and the detective could not help being strangely moved as he thought of the devotion shown him by the journalist. The detective was still in his wheel chair. With a skilful turn he went back to the balcony and his post of observation. Evening was coming on. After a fine day, the sky had become leaden and overcast with great clouds. A storm was threatening. Juve swore. "I shan't see much this evening. This confounded Josephine is so sentimental that she loves dreaming in the gloaming at her window without lighting up. Devil take her!" Juve had armed himself with his spyglass. He apparently levelled it at Port Milat, and in that way he could see something of the movements of Josephine in the rooms opposite him. "Flowers on the chimney and on the piano. Expecting her lover, probably." Suddenly he started up in his chair. Ah, someone has rung her bell. She is going toward the entrance door. A minute passed. In the front rooms Juve no longer saw anyone. Josephine must be receiving a visitor. Some minutes more went by. A heavy shower of rain came down and Juve was forced to leave his balcony. When he resumed his watching he could not suppress an exclamation of surprise. Ah, if he would only turn! This cursed rain prevents me from seeing clearly what is afoot. The brute, why won't he turn? There, he has laid his bag on a chair. His initials must be on it, but I can't read them. Yet, the height of the man, his gestures, it's he, sure enough, it's Chaleck. Juve suddenly abandoned his post of observation, propelled his chair to the back room of the suite, and seized the telephone apparatus. Hello! Give me the Prefecture! It is Juve speaking. Send at once detectives Léon and Michel to number 33C Boulevard Perrier South. They are to wait at the door of the house and arrest, as they come out, the persons I marked as numbers 14 and 15. Let them make haste. Assuredly Chaleck won't leave at once, if he has come to see Josephine. No doubt he has important things to say. Léon and Michel will arrive in time to nab him first and Josephine after. And tomorrow, when I have them handcuffed before me, it's the deuce if I don't manage to get the truth out of them.
Juve went back to his lookout.
Oh, they seem very lively, both of them. The talk must be serious. Josephine doesn't look pleased. She seems to disagree with what Chaleck is saying. One would think he was giving her orders. No, she is down on her knees. A declaration of love. After Loupart and Dixon, it's that infernal doctor's turn.
Juve watched for a moment longer the young woman and the mysterious and elusive Chaleck.
Ah, that's what I feared. Chaleck is going, and Léon and Michel haven't come.
Juve hesitated. Should he go down, rush to the boulevard and try to collar the ruffian? That wasn't possible. Juve lived on the 5th floor, so that he had one more story to get down than Chaleck. Then there was the railway line between him and Josephine's house. Chaleck would have ample time to disappear. But Juve reassured himself.
Luckily, he has left his hold all, and if I mistake not, that is his stick on the chair. Therefore, he expects to come back.
Powerless to act, Juve witnessed the exit of Chaleck, who soon appeared at the door of Josephine's house and went striding off. Juve followed him with his eyes, intensely chagrined. Would he ever again find such a good opportunity of laying hands on the ruffian? Chaleck vanished round the corner of the street, and Juve again took to watching Josephine. The young woman did not appear to be upset by her late visitor. She sat, her elbows on the table, turning with a listless finger the pages of a volume.
Clearly he is coming back, thought Juve, or he would not have left his things there. I shall nab him in a few days at latest.
Juve was about to leave his post of observation when he saw Josephine raise her head in an attitude of listening to an indefinable and mysterious noise.
What is going on? Juve asked himself. She cannot be already watching for Chaleck's return.
Then Juve started. Oh! Oh! He had just seen Josephine at a single bound spring toward the window. The young woman gazed steadily in front of her, her arms outstretched in a posture of horror. She seemed in a state of abject terror. There was no mistaking her motions. She was panic-stricken, panting, trembling in all her limbs. Juve, who lost no movement of the hapless woman, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead.
What's the matter with her? There is nobody in the room. I see nothing. What can frighten her to that extent? Oh, my God!
Forgetting all precautions, all the comedy he was preparing so carefully for the neighbours' benefit, he sprang to his feet, deserting his wheelchair, his hands clenched on the rail of the balcony, while spellbound by the sight he beheld, he leaned over the rail as if in a frantic desire to fling himself to the young woman's help. Josephine had bestridden the sash of her window. She was now standing on the ledge, holding with one hand to the rail of her balcony, and her body flung backwards as if mad with terror.
What is happening? Oh, the poor soul!
Josephine, uttering a desperate cry, had let go of the supporting rail and had flung herself into space. Juve saw the young woman's body spin in the air, heard the dull thud that it made as it crashed against the ground.
It is monstrous!
Juve, beside himself, tore down the stairs full tilt, past breathlessly the portress,
who seemed likely to faint at the sight of the headlong pace of the supposed paralytic. He went round Boulevard Pereire, darted along the railway line, and, panting, got to the side of the ill-starred Josephine. At the sound of her fall and the cries she uttered, people had flown to the windows, passers-by had turned round. When Juve got there, a ring of people had already formed round the unfortunate woman. The detective roughly pushed some of them aside, knelt down beside the body, and put his ear to the chest. "Dead?" "No." A faint groan came from the lips of the poor sufferer. Juve realised that by unheard of luck, Josephine, in the course of her fall, had struck the outer branches of one of the trees that fringed the boulevard. This had somewhat broken the shock, but her legs were frightfully broken and one of her arms hung lifeless. "Quick!" commanded Juve. "A cab! Take her to the hospital!" As soon as help was forthcoming, Juve, recalled to the duties of his profession, asked himself: "What can have occurred? What was it she tried to escape by throwing herself into space? I saw the whole room. There was no one with her. She must have been the victim of a delusion." End of chapter 29. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 30. Uncle and Nephew. "So, uncle, you have decided to live at Neuilly?" "Oh, it's quite settled. Your aunt finds the place charming, and besides, it would be so pleasant to have a garden. Also, the land is sure to grow more valuable in this neighbourhood, and the purchase of a house here would be a good speculation." The stout man, as he uttered the word speculation, beamed. The mere sight of him suggested the small tradesman, grown rich by dint of long and arduous years of toil, retired from business, and prone to fancy he was a man of genius. Compared with him, the young man he styled nephew, slim, elaborately elegant, his little moustache carefully curled, gave the impression of coming out of a draper's shop and wanting to be taken for a swell. Evidently the nephew courted the uncle and flattered him. "You are right. Land speculations are very sure and very profitable. So you wrote to the caretaker of the house to let you view it?" "I did, and he answered, 'Come to-day or to-morrow, I shall be at your orders.' That is why I sent you word to go with me, for since you are the sole heir of my fortune..." "Oh, uncle, you may be sure..." The Madeleine tramway, where the two men were talking aloud, heeding little the amused notice of the other passengers, pulled up a moment in the Place de l'Église at Neuilly. "Let us get down. Boulevard Inkermann begins here." With the pantings and gaspings of a man whose stoutness made all physical exercise irksome, the uncle lowered himself off the footboard of the tram. The young man sprang to his side. After 5 minutes' walk the two men were in front of Lady Beltham's house, the identical house to which Juve and Fandor had previously come before to make exhaustive inquiries. "You see, my boy," declared the stout party, "it is not at all a bad-looking house. Evidently it has not been lived in for a long time. Its state of outside dilapidation shows how neglected it has been, but it is possible that inside there may not be many repairs to be made." "In any case, the garden is very fine." "Yes, the grounds are large enough. And then what I like is its wonderful seclusion. The wall surrounding it on all sides is very high, and the entrance gate would be hard for robbers to tackle." "Shall I ring?" "Yes, ring." The young man pressed the button. A peal rang out in the distance. Presently the porter appeared. He was a big fellow with long whiskers and a distinguished air, the perfect type of the high-class servant. "You gentlemen have come to see the house?" "Exactly. I am Monsieur Durand. It is I who wrote to you." "To be sure, sir, I remember." The porter showed the two visitors into the garden, and forthwith the stout man drew his nephew along the paths. The sense of proprietorship came over him at once. He spared his relative none of the points of the property. You see, Émile, it isn't big, but still it is amply sufficient. No trees before the house, which allows a view of the boulevard from all the windows. The servants' quarters, being in the far part of the garden, can in no way annoy the people in the house. Notice, too, that the trees are quite young and their foliage thin. I don't care for too luxuriant gardens which are apt to block the view."
"That's right, uncle." The porter, who was following the two, broke in upon the ecstasy of the prospective owner. "Would you gentlemen like to see the house?"
"Why, certainly, certainly."
The stout man, however, before entering, was bent on going round it. He noticed the smallest details, growing more and more enthusiastic.
"Look, Émile, it is very well built. The ground floor is sufficiently raised so as not to be too damp. The big terrace on which the 3 French windows open must be very cheerful in the summer. Oh, there are drain pipes at the 4 corners! And we mustn't fail to see the cellars. I am sure they are very fine. Bend down over the air holes. What do you think of the gratings that close them? And now, shall we go in?"
The porter led them to the main entrance door. "Here is the vestibule, gentlemen. To the left, the servants' hall and kitchen. To the right, the dining room. Facing you, a small drawing room, then the large drawing room, and lastly, the double staircase leading to the first floor." The stout man dropped into a chair.
"And to whom does this place belong?"
"Lady Beltham, sir."
"Does she not live here?"
"Not now. At this moment she is travelling." In the wake of the porter, uncle and nephew went through the rooms on the ground floor. As happens in all untenanted houses, the damp had wrought terrible havoc. The flooring, worm eaten, creaked under their feet; the carpets had large damp spots on them; the paper hung loose on the walls, while the furniture was covered with a thick coat of dust.
"Don't pay any attention to the furniture, Émile. It matters little. What we must first look at is the arrangement of the rooms. Why, there are iron shutters! I like that."
"To be sure, uncle, they are very practical."
"Yes, yes. To begin with, when those shutters are closed, it would be impossible from the outside to see anything in the rooms, not even the least light."
The porter proceeded to show them the first floor of the house.
"There is only one staircase?"
asked the stout man. "Yes, only one."
"And what is the cause of the unusual dampness? We are far from the Seine. The garden is not very leafy."
"There is a leaky cistern in the cellars, sir. Here is the largest bedroom. It was my lady's."
"Yes, one sees it has been the last room to be lived in."
At this harmless remark, the porter seemed very upset. "What makes you think that, sir?"
"Why, the chairs are pushed about as though recently used. There is much less dust on the furniture. And there's a print. Look at the desk, there is a trace of dust on the diary. The blotting paper has been moved lately. Someone has been writing there. Why, what's wrong with you?"
As he listened to the stout man's remarks, the porter grew strangely pale. "Oh," he stammered, "it's nothing, nothing at all."
"One would say you were afraid."
"Afraid? No, sir, I am not afraid, only..."
"Only what?"
"Well, gentlemen, it is best not to stay here. Lady Beltham is selling the house because it is haunted." Neither of the visitors seemed impressed by the statement of their guide. The elder laughed a jolly laugh.
"Are there ghosts?"
"Why, sir, spirits come here."
"Have you seen them?"
"Oh, certainly not, sir. When they are there, I shut myself up in the lodge, I can assure you."
"When do they appear?"
"They come almost always on Tuesday nights." And warming to his subject, the porter gave details. He got the impression first on one occasion, when her ladyship was absent. She had left some days before for Italy. It was Sunday. Then during Tuesday night, while walking in the garden, he heard movements inside the house. "I went to fetch my keys, and when I came back I found nobody. I thought at first it was burglars, but I saw nothing had been taken away. Yet I was not mistaken. Furniture had been moved. There were breadcrumbs on the floor." The young man roared with laughter. "Breadcrumbs! Then your spirits come and sup here?" The uncle, equally amused, asked:
"And what did Lady Beltham think when you told her that?"
"Lady Beltham laughed at me. But, sir, I had my own ideas. I watched in the garden daily, and I heard the same sounds, and always on Tuesday nights.
At last I laid a trap. I put a chalk mark round the stairs in Lady Beltham's room, she being still away. Well, sir, when I came to the house again on Thursday, the chairs had been moved. I told Lady Beltham, and this time she seemed very much frightened. It is since then she made up her mind to sell the house." "For all that, what makes you say they are spirits?" "What else could it be, sir? I also heard the sounds of chains jangling. One night I even heard a strange and terrible hiss." "Well," cried the stout man, beginning to go down the staircase, "since the house is haunted, I shall have to pay less for it, eh, Émile?" "You will buy, sir, in spite of that?" "To be sure. Your phantoms alarm me less than the damp." "Oh, the damp! That can be easily remedied. You will see that we have a central heating stove installed." The porter led his visitors down a narrow stair to the cellars. "Take care, gentlemen, the stairs are slippery." Then he observed: "You don't need a candle, the gratings are big enough to give plenty of light." "What is that?" asked the young man, pointing to a huge iron cylinder embedded in the earth and rising some 4½ feet above the floor. "The cistern of which I spoke, as you can see for yourselves. It is all but full." The porter hurried them on. "That is the heating stove. There are conductors throughout the house. When it is in full blast, the house is even too warm." "But your great stove is in pieces," objected the stout man, pointing with his stick to iron plates torn out of one side of the central furnace. "Oh, sir, that happened at the time of the floods. But it won't cost much to put it right. If you gentlemen will examine the inside of the apparatus, you will see that the pipes are in perfect order." The uncle followed the porter's suggestion. "Your pipes are as big as chimneys, a man could pass through them." The inspection ended, uncle and nephew bestowed a liberal tip on their guide. They would think it over and write or come again soon. The two relatives traced their steps to Boulevard Inkermann. "Fandor?" "Juve?" "We have got them." Uncle and nephew, that is to say, Juve and Fandor, could talk quite freely now. "Juve, are you certain that we have got them?" Juve pushed his friend into a wine shop and ordered drinks. He then drew from his pocket a piece of paper, quite blank. "What is that?" "A bit of paper I picked up on Lady Beltham's desk while the porter's back was turned. It will serve for a little experiment. If it is not long since a hand rested on it, we shall find the print." "On this blank paper?" "Yes, Fandor. Look!" Juve drew a pencil from his pocket and scratched off a fine dust of graphite, which he shook over the paper. Gradually the outline of a hand appeared, faint, but quite visible. "That is how," resumed Juve, "with this very simple process, you can decipher the fingerprints of persons who have written or rested their hands on anything paper, glass, even wood. According to the clearness of this outline, which is thrown up by the coagulation of the plumbago, thanks to the ordinary moisture of the hand, which was laid on the paper, I can assure you that someone wrote on Lady Beltham's desk about 10 days ago." "It is wonderful," said Fandor. "Here, then, is proof positive that her ladyship visits her house from time to time." "Correct, or at least that someone goes there, for that is a man's hand." "Well, what are you going to do now, Juve?" "Now? I'm off to the Prefecture to get rid of my false embonpoint, which bothers me no end. I have never been so glad that I am not naturally stout." Fandor laughed. "And I own to you that I shan't be sorry to get rid of my false moustache. All the while I was inspecting that cursed house, this moustache kept tickling my nose, making me want to sneeze." "You should have done so." "But suppose my moustache had come off?" End of Chapter 30. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 31. Lovers and Accomplices. "Oh, who is that?" From the shadow issued someone, who calmly replied: "It is I." "Ah, I know you now, but why this disguise?"
"Madame the Superior, I present myself, Dr. Chaleck. Isn't my disguise as good as yours?"
"What do you want of me? Speak quickly, I am frightened."
"To begin with, I thank you for coming to the tryst at your house, at ours. For 5 Tuesdays I have waited in vain. But first, madame, explain your sudden conversion, the reason of your sudden entry into orders. That is a strange device for the mistress of Gurn." Dr. Chaleck held under the lash of his irony the unhappy woman, who seemed overcome by anxiety. The two were facing each other in the large room that formed the middle of the first floor of the house in Boulevard Inkermann, at Neuilly. It was, in fact, the only room fit to use. They had left to neglect and inclement weather the other rooms in the elegant mansion, which some years before was considered in the Parisian world as one of the most comfortable and luxurious in the foreign colony. It was in truth here that in days gone by the tragic drama had been played. Death had laid its cold hand upon the gilded trappings of the great apartment, and laughter and joy had taken flight. However, time passes so quickly, and evil memories so soon grow dim, that many had forgotten the grim happenings which 3 years before had beset the mansion on the boulevard. It was at first the deep mourning of Lady Beltham, whose husband had been mysteriously done to death at Belleville. Then, some weeks later, occurred the awful scene of the arrest of Lord Beltham's murderer, just as he was leaving the house, an arrest due to Juve, who, though he succeeded in laying hands on the assassin, the infamous Gurn, was not able to prove, sure though he might be of it, that the slayer of the husband was the lover of the wife. After these shocking events, Lady Beltham left France, dismissing the many attendants with whom she loved to surround herself like a true queen of beauty, luxury, and wealth. At rare intervals, the lady, whose existence grew more and more mysterious, went back for a few days to her house at Neuilly. She would vanish, would reappear, living like a recluse, almost in entire solitude, receiving none of her old acquaintances. About a year ago, she seemed to want to settle finally at Boulevard Inkermann. Workmen began to put the house in order again. The lodge was opened, and a family of caretakers came. Then, suddenly, the work had been broken off. Some weeks went by while Lady Beltham lived alone with her companion. Then both disappeared. Lady Beltham shivered, and, gathering about her shoulders the cloak which covered her religious habit, muttered: "I'm cold." "Beastly weather, and to think this is July." Chaleck crossed to a register in the corner of the room. "No good to leave that open. An icy wind comes through the passage to the cellar." Lady Beltham turned in alarm towards her enigmatic companion.
"Why did you let it be supposed I was dead?"
"Why did you yourself leave here 2 days before the crime at the Cité Fourchot?" Lady Beltham hung her head, and with a sob in her voice:
"I was deserted and jealous. Besides, I was enduring frightful remorse. The idea had come to me to write down the terrible secret which haunted my spirit, to give the story to someone I could trust, an attorney, and then..."
"Go on, pray."
"And then, what I had written suddenly vanished. It was after that I lost my head and fled. I had long been meaning to withdraw from the world. The sisters of Saint Clotilde offered to receive me in their house at Nogent."
Chaleck added brutally: "That isn't all. You forgot to say you were afraid. Come, be frank. Afraid of Gurn, of me."
"Well, yes, I was afraid, not so much of you, but of our crimes. I am also afraid of dying."
"That confession you wrote became known to some one who confided it to me."
"Heavens!" murmured the unhappy woman. "Who mentioned it?"
Chaleck had again crossed to the register, which, although closed by him some moments before, was open again, letting into the room a blast of icy air from the basement. "This can't stay shut. It must be seen to," he muttered. Lady Beltham, shaken by a nervous tremor, insisted: "Who betrayed me? Who told?" Chaleck seated himself by her side. "You remember Valgrand, the actor? Well, Valgrand was married.
His wife sought to clear up the mystery of his disappearance, and went where, I ask you? Why, to you, Lady Beltham. You took her as companion. It would have been impossible to introduce a more redoubtable spy into the house than the widow Valgrand, known by you under the false name of Madame Raymond." Lady Beltham remained panic-stricken. "We are lost!" Chaleck squeezed her two hands in a genuine burst of affection. "We are saved!" he shouted. "Madame Raymond will talk no more." "The body at the Cité Frochot?" Chaleck nodded. "Yes." She looked at him in alarm, mingled with repulsion and horror. "Now understand that the death saved you, and if I saved you, it is because I loved you, love you still, will always love you." Lady Beltham, overcome, let herself fall into Chaleck's arms, her head resting on her lover's shoulder as she wept hot tears. Lady Beltham was once more enslaved, a captive. More than 2 years ago she had broken with the mysterious and terrible being whom she had once egged on to kill her husband, and with whom she then committed the most appalling of crimes. During this separation the unhappy woman had tried to pull herself together, to acquire a fresh honesty of mind and body, a new soul, dreamed of finding again in religion some help, some forgetfulness. She had later experienced the frightful tortures of jealousy, knowing her late lover had mistresses; but she resisted the craving to see him again, and pictured him to herself in such terrible guise that she felt an overwhelming fear of finding herself face to face with him. Now the season of calm and quiet she had evoked was suddenly dispelled. First came the mysterious disappearance of her confession and the weird crime of the Cité Frochot, following on its loss. To be sure, she did not then know that Dr. Chaleck, of whom the papers spoke, was none other than Gurn. But had they not in La Capitale spoken of Fantômas in that connection? And at this disquieting comparison Lady Beltham had felt sinister forebodings. Other mysteries had then supervened, unaccountable to the guilty lady, who by that time was already seeking her new birth in the bosom of religion. Alas! Her miseries were to grow definite enough. At the very gate of the convent an innocent man, Bonardin the actor, fell victim to the attack of Juve, also innocent, and in that affair she felt the complicity of her late lover grow more and more certain. She then received a letter from him, followed by a second. Gurn called her to his place, their place, the mansion at Neuilly, every Tuesday night. She held out several times despite threatened reprisals. At last she yielded and went. She expected Gurn. It was Chaleck she found. The two were one. From henceforth she was faced with this accomplice, guilty of new crimes, clothed in a new personality, already under suspicion, which doubtless he would cast off only to assume another which would enable him still further to extend the list of his crimes. But despite all the horror her lover inspired her with, she felt herself tamed again, powerless to resist him, ready to do anything the moment he bade her. She inquired feebly: "Who was it killed Madame Raymond? Was it that ruffian whom they speak of in the papers, Loupart?" "Well, not exactly." "Then it was you? Speak, I would rather know." "It was neither he nor I, and yet it was to some extent both." "I do not understand." "It is rather difficult to understand. Our executioner does not lack originality. I may say it is something which lives, yet does not think." "Who is it? Who is it?" "Why not ask Detective Juve? Oh, Juve, too, would like to know who the deuce all these people are: Gurn, Chaleck, Loupart, and above all, Fantômas." "Fantômas? Ah, I scarcely dare utter that name. Yet a doubt oppresses my heart. Tell me, you are not yourself Fantômas?" Chaleck freed himself gently, for Lady Beltham had wound her arms around his neck. "I know nothing. I am merely the lover who loves you." "Then let us go far away. Let us begin a new existence together. Will you? Come." She stopped all at once. I heard a noise. Chaleck, too, listened. Some slight creakings had, indeed, disturbed the hush of the room, But outside, the wind and the rain whirled around the dilapidated, lonely abode, and it was not surprising that unaccountable sounds should be audible in the stillness. Once more Lady Beltham built up her plans, catching a glimpse of a future all peace and happiness. With a brief, harsh remark, Chaleck brought her back to reality. "All that cannot be, at least for the moment. We must first..." Lady Beltham laid her hand on his lips. "Do not speak," she begged. "A fresh crime, that's what you mean?" "A vengeance, an execution. A man has set himself to run me down, has determined my ruin. Between us it is a struggle without quarter. My life is not safe, but at the cost of his, so he must perish. In 4 days they will find Detective Juve dead in his own bed. And with him will finally vanish the fiction he has evoked of Fantomas. Fantomas! Ah, if society knew, if humanity, instead of being what it is! But it matters little." "Fantomas? What will become of him, of you?" "Have I told you that I was Fantomas?" "No," stammered she, "but..." The dim light of a pale dawn filtered through the closed shutters of the big drawing room in which lover and mistress had met again, after long weeks of separation, to call up sinister memories. For all their hopes, the limit of the tribulations to which they were a prey seemed still far off. Chaleck blew out the lamp. He drew aside the curtains. Sharply he put an end to the interview. "I am off, Lady Beltham. Soon we shall meet again. Never let anyone suspect what we have said to each other. Farewell." The hapless woman, crushed and broken by emotion, remained nearly an hour alone in the great room. Then the requirements of her official life came to her mind. It was necessary to return to the convent at Nogent. Extricating themselves painfully from the pipes of the great stove, Juve and Fandor, covered with plaster, wreathed with cobwebs, and freely sprinkled with dust, fell back suddenly into the middle of the cellar. The two men, heedless of the disarray of their dress and their painful cramped limbs, spoke both at once, dumbfounded but joyful. "Well, Juve?" "Well, Fandor, we got something for our money." "Oh, what a lovely night, Juve! I wouldn't have given up my place for a fortune." "We had front seats, though to be sure the velvet armchairs were lacking." They were silent for a moment, their minds fully occupied with a crowd of ideas. So Chaleck and Loupart were one and the same? And Lady Beltham was indeed the accomplice of Gurn? An unhappy accomplice, repentant, wretched, a criminal through love? "Fandor, they are ours now, let us act." The pair, not sorry to breathe a little more easily than they had done for the past few hours, went upstairs, reached the ground floor, and made their way into the drawing room, where during the night Dr. Chaleck and Lady Beltham had had their memorable interview. Juve, without a word, paced up and down the room, poking in all the corners, then gave a cry. "Here is the famous mouth of the heater, which that brute Chaleck tried to shut, and I persisted in opening so as not to lose a word of his instructive conversation. No matter, if he felt cold, what did I feel like?" "The fact is," added Fandor, whose hoarse voice bore witness to the difficulties he had just passed through, "these stove pipes have very little comfort about them." "What can you expect?" cried Juve. "The architect did not think of us when he built the house. And now, Fandor, we have a hard task before us, and we need all the luck we can get. For certainly it is Fantomas we have unearthed. Fantomas, the lover of Lady Beltham, the slayer of her husband, the murderer of Valgrand, the master that got rid of Madame Raymond. Gurn, Chaleck, Loupart, the one being who can be all those in himself too, Fantomas." As the two friends left Lady Beltham's house without attracting notice, the detective drew from his pocket a species of little scale, which he showed Fandor. "What do you make of that?" "I haven't the least idea." "Well, I have, and it may put us in the way of a great discovery. Did you notice that Chaleck did not say definitely who the executioner of Madame Raymond was?" "To be sure." "Well, I believe that I have a morsel of this executioner in my pocket." End of Chapter 31. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com
Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 32. The Silent Executioner. Juve was in his study, smoking a cigarette. It was 9 in the evening. The door leading to the lobby opened and Fandor walked in. "All right this evening?" "All right. What brings you here, Fandor?" The journalist smiled and pointed to a calendar on the wall. "The fact that it's this evening, Juve." "The date fixed by Chaleck or Fantômas for my demise. Tomorrow morning I am to be found in my bed, strangled, crushed, or something of the sort. I suppose you've come to get a farewell interview for La Capitale, to gather the minutest details of the frightful crime so that you can publish a special edition. The tragedy in Rue Bonaparte. Juve overcome by Fantomas." Fandor listened, amused at the detective's outburst. "You'd be angry with me, Juve," he declared, in the same jocular strain, "for passing by such a sensational piece of news, wouldn't you?" "That is so. And then I own I expected my last evening to be a lonely one. There was a feeling of sadness at the bottom of my heart. I thought that before dying I should have liked to say farewell to young Fandor, whose life I am continually putting in peril by my crazy ventures, but whom I love as the surest of companions, the sagest of advisers, the most discreet of confidants." Fandor was touched. With a spontaneous movement, he sprang to the armchair in which Juve sat, seized and wrung the detective's hands. "What?" "I shall stay here. You don't suppose I'm going to leave you to pass this night alone?" Juve, touched beyond measure by Fandor's words, seemed uncertain what he ought to decide. "I can't pretend, Fandor, that your presence is not agreeable, and I'm grateful to you for your sympathy. I knew I could count on you, but after all, lad, we must look ahead and consider all contingencies. Fantomas may succeed. Now you know what I have set out to do. If I should fail, I should like to think that you would carry on the work as my successor, and put an end to Fantomas." "But, Juve, you are threatened by Fantomas. That is why I am here to help you." "Well, I have no bed to put you in." Fandor, taken aback, stared at the detective. The latter rose and began walking about the room, then turned sharply and gazed at the young man. "You are quite determined to stay with me?" "Yes." "And if I bade you go?" "I should disobey you." "Very well then," concluded Juve, shrugging his shoulders, "come along and light me." The detective passed out of the apartment and made for the stairs. "Where are we bound for?" asked Fandor. "The garret," Juve replied. A quarter of an hour later, Juve and Fandor dragged into the bedroom a huge openwork wicker basket. "Whew!" cried Juve, mopping his forehead. "No one would believe it was so heavy." Fandor smiled. "It's full of rubbish. Really, Juve, you are not a tidy man." Juve, without reply, proceeded to empty the basket, pulling out books, linen, pieces of wood, carpet, rolls of paper, in fact, the accumulated refuse of 15 years. "What is your height?" he asked. "If I remember right, 5 feet 10." Juve got out his pocket measure and took the length of the crate. "That's all right," he murmured. "You'll be quite snug and comfortable in it." Fandor burst out: "You're a cheerful host, Juve! You bottle up your guests in cages now?" Juve placed a mattress at the bottom of the basket and laid 2 blankets over that, then he put a pillow on top. Patting the bedding to make it smooth, he declared with a laugh: "I fear nothing, but I have taken precautions. I have posted 2 men in the porter's lodge. I have loaded my revolver, and dined comfortably. About 11:30 I shall go to bed as usual. However, instead of going to sleep, I shall endeavour to keep awake. At dinner I took 3 cups of coffee, and when you go I shall drink a 4th." "Excuse me," said Fandor, "but I am not going away." "There, you'll sleep splendid inside that, Fandor." The journalist, used to the devices of his friend, nodded his head. Juve had already taken off his coat and waistcoat, and now drew from a box 3 belts half a yard in breadth, and studded outside with sharp points. "Look, Fandor, I shall be completely protected when I am swathed in them. Oh," he added, "I was going to forget my leg guards." Juve went back to the box and took out two other rolls, also studded with spikes. Fandor looked in amazement at his gear, and Juve observed laughingly: "It will cost me a pair of sheets and maybe a mattress." "What does it mean?" "These defensive works have a double object: to protect me against Fantômas, or the executioner he will send, and also I shall be able to determine the civil status of the executioner in question." Fandor, more and more puzzled, inspected the iron spikes, which were 2 or more inches in length. "This contrivance is not new," said Juve. "Leboeuf wore arm guards like these under his jackets, and when the officers wanted to seize him, they tore their hands." I know," replied Fandor, "but..." The detective all at once laid a finger on his lips. "It's now 11:20, and I am in the habit of being in bed at 1/2 Fantômas is bound to know it. When he comes, or sends, he must not notice anything out of the way. Get into your wicker case and shut the lid down carefully. By the by, I shall leave the window slightly open." "Isn't that a bit risky?" "It's one of my habits, and not to make Fantômas suspicious, I alter my ways in nothing." Fandor settled himself in his case, and Juve also got into bed. As he put out the light, he gave a warning: "We mustn't close an eye or utter a word. Whatever happens, don't move. But when I call, strike a light at once and come to me." "All right," replied Fandor. "Fandor!" Juve's cry rent the stillness of the night, loud and compelling. The journalist leaped from his wicker basket so abruptly that he knocked against the lamp stand, and the lamp fell to the floor. Fandor searched for his matches in vain. "Light up, Fandor!" shouted Juve. The noise of a struggle, the dull thud of a fall on the floor, maddened the journalist. In the darkness he heard Juve groaning, scraping the floor with his boots, making violent efforts to resist some mysterious assailant. "Be quick, in God's name!" implored the pain-wrung voice of the detective. Fandor trod on the glass of the lamp, which broke. He tripped, knocked his head against a press, rebounded, then suddenly uttered a terrible cry. His hands, outstretched apart in the gloom, had brushed a cold, shiny body which slid under his palms. "Fandor! Help! Fandor!" Desperate, Fandor plunged haphazard about the disordered chamber wrapped in darkness. Suddenly he rushed into the study hard by, found there another lamp, which he lit in haste, and hurried back with it. A fearful sight wrung a cry of terror from him. Juve, on his knees on the floor, was covered with blood. "Juve!" "It's all right, Fandor. Someone has bled, but not I." The detective rushed to the open window and leaned out into the dark night. "Listen!" he cried. "Do you hear that low hissing, that dull rustling?" "Yes, I heard it just now."
"It was the executioner." The detective drew back into the room, shut the window, pulled down the blinds, and then took off his armour. Curiously he examined the stains of blood, the tiny shreds of flesh that had remained on the points. "We have no more to fear now," he said. "The stroke has been tried and has failed."
"Juve, tell me what has happened. I may be an idiot, but I don't understand at all."
"You are no fool, Fandor. Far from it. But if in many circumstances you reason and argue with considerable aptness, I grant you far less deductive faculty. That does not seem to be your forte."
Fandor seated himself before the detective, and the latter held forth.
"When we found ourselves faced with the first crime, that of the Cité Frochot, and our notice was drawn to the elusive Fantômas, we were unable to decide in what manner that hapless Madame Raymond, whom we then took for the Lady Beltham, had been done to death. Now, remember, Fandor, that during the night of mystery, hidden behind the curtains in Chaleck's study, we heard weird rustlings and faint sort of hissings, didn't we?"
"We did," admitted Fandor, at a loss. "But go on, Juve."
"When we were called to investigate the attack on the American, Dixon, it was easy for us to conclude that the attempt of which the pugilist had been the object was the outcome of the same plan of battle as that which cost the widow Valgrand her life. The mysterious executioner, which Chaleck did not disguise from Lady Beltham, was thus a being endowed with vigour enough to completely crush a woman's body, and likely do as much to that of an ordinary man. But the executioner in question was not strong enough to get the better of the grand physique of the champion pugilist, since it failed in its attempt. This instrument, of limited power, if I may so describe it, must then be not a mechanism which nothing can resist, but a living being. It must also be a creature striking panic, terrifying, formidable. You ask why, Fandor?"
"Yes, to be sure."
"I am going to tell you. If our poor friend Josephine were not still in a high fever, she would certainly uphold me. You remember the business on the Boulevard Perrier? Chaleck or Fantômas wants to be rid of the woman he loved under the guise of Loupart, since he has gone back to Lady Beltham. Moreover, Josephine chatters too much with Dixon, with the police. Chaleck, Fantômas, therefore, goes up to Josephine's. After having told the poor creature I know not what yarn, he departs, leaving behind in his hold-all the instrument. Now this last, when it shows itself, so terrifies the poor girl that she throws herself out of the window." "I begin to see what you mean," said the journalist. "Listen," replied Juve. "The mysterious, nameless and terrible accomplice of Fantômas is no other than a snake trained to crush bodies in its coils. After having long suspected its existence, I began to be sure of it when I found that strange scale at Neuilly. This accounts for the incomprehensible state of Madame Valgrand's body, the extraordinary attempt on Dixon, the murderous thing that terrified Josephine. That is why, expecting tonight's visit, I barbed myself with iron like a knight of old, feeling pretty sure that if the hands of the officers were torn by the armlets of Le Boeuf, the coils of Fantômas' serpent would be flayed on touching my sharp spikes." "Juve," cried Fandor, "if I hadn't had the bad luck to upset the lamp, we should have caught this frightful beast." "Probably, but what should we have done with it? After all, it's better that it should go back to Fantômas."
"But you haven't told me what happened." The young man's face displayed such curiosity that Juve burst out laughing.
"Journalist! Incorrigible newsmonger! All right, take notes for your article describing this appalling adventure. So, then, Fandor, the lamp once out, the hours go by a trifle more slowly in the darkness than in the light. As for me, armoured as I was, I tried not to stir in my bed, to spare the sheets. Juve is not wealthy. Midnight, 1 o'clock, 2, the quarter past. How long it is! Then an alarm, a cat that mews strangely. Then comes that little hissing sound I begin to know. Hiss, hiss. Oh, what a horrid feeling! I guess that the window is opening wider. You heard, as I did, Fandor, the revolting scales grit on the boards. But you didn't know what it was, whereas I did know it was the snake. I swear to you it needed all my pluck not to flinch, for I wanted at any cost to see it through to the end, and know whether, behind this reptile, Fantômas was not going to show his vile snout. Ah, the brute! How quickly he went to work! As I was listening, my muscles tense, my nerves on edge, I suddenly felt my sheets stir. The foul beast is trained to attack beds. Remember the attack on Dixon. And suddenly it was the grip, furious, quick as a whip stroke, twining about me. I was thrown down, tossed, shaken, torn like a feather, tied up like a sausage. My arms glued to my body, my loins hampered. I intended not to say a word. I had faith in my ironwork, but to be frank, I was scared, awfully scared, and I yelled: "Fandor, help!" Oh, those accursed moments! He began to squeeze horribly, when all at once I felt a cold liquid flow over my skin. Blood. The brute was wounded. We still wrestled, and you tripped in the darkness and smashed the glass of the lamp, and I was choking gradually. All my life I shall remember it. And then, what a relief! What joy when the grip slackened, when he gives up and makes off! The beast glided over the floor, reached the window, hissed frantically, and vanished. There, Monsieur Reporter, you have impressions from life, and rough ones too. Well, the luck is turning, and I think it is veering to our quarter. Things are going from bad to worse for Fantômas. I tell you, Fandor, we shall nab him before long.
End of chapter 32. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of the Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 33. A Scandal in the Cloister. Slight sounds, scarcely audible, disturbed the peace of the cloister. In the absolute silence of the night, vague noises could be distinguished. Furtive steps, whisperings, doors opened or shut cautiously. Then the blinking light of a candle shone at a casement. 2 or 3 other windows were illuminated, and the hubbub grew general.
Voices were heard, frightened interjections, the stir increased in the long corridor on which cells opened. Generally the curtains of these cells were discreetly drawn. Now they were being pulled aside. Drowsy faces looked out of the gloom. The excitement increased. "Sister Marguerite! Sister Vincent! Sister Clotilde! What is it? What is happening? Listen!" The alarmed nuns gathered at the far end of the passage. The worthy women, roused from their rest, had hastily arranged their coifs and chastely wrapped themselves in their flowing robes. They turned their frightened faces toward the chapel. "Burglars!" murmured the sister who was treasurer of the convent, thinking of the cup of gold that the humble little sisterhood preserved as a relic with jealous care. Another sister, recently come from the Creuse, from which she had been driven by the laws, did not conceal her fears. "More emissaries of the government! They are going to turn us out!" The senior, Sister Vincent, quivering with alarm, stammered: "It is a revolution! I saw that in '70!" A heap of chairs under the vaulting suddenly toppled down. Panic-stricken, the sisters crowded close together, not daring to go to the chapel, which was joined to the passage by a little staircase. "And the Mother Superior! What did she think of it all? What would she say?" They drew near the cell, a little apart from the others, occupied by the lady who, on taking the headship of the house, had brought with her precious personal assistants, and a good deal of money as well. Sister Vincent, who had gone forward, and was about to enter the little chamber, drew back. "Our Holy Mother," she informed the others, "is at her prayers." At this very moment broken cries rang down the passage. Sister Frances, the janitress, who everyone believed was calmly slumbering in her lodge, suddenly appeared, her eyes wild, her garments in disarray. The sisters gathered round her, but the helpless woman shrieked, quite beside herself. "Let me go! Let us flee! I have seen the devil! He is there, in the church! It is frightful!" Mad with terror, the sister explained in disjointed phrases what had alarmed her. She had heard a noise and fancied it might be the gardener's dog shut by mistake in the chapel. Then behold, at the moment she entered the choir, the stained glass window above the shrine of Saint Clotilde, their patroness, suddenly gave way, and through the opening appeared a supernatural being, who came toward her ejaculating words she could not understand. Armed with a great cudgel, he struck right and left, making a terrible uproar. Thereupon the janitress made an effort to escape, but the demon barred her path, and in a sepulchral voice commanded her to go for the Mother Superior, and bid her come at once, if she did not want the worst of evils to fall upon the sisterhood. She had scarcely finished when an echoing crash was heard. The sisters suppressed a cry, and as they turned, pale with dread, before them stood their Mother Superior. With a sweeping gesture she vaguely gave a blessing as if to endow them with courage, then turned to the janitress. "My dear Sister Françoise, calm yourself. Be brave. God will not forsake us. I intend to comply with the desire of the stranger. I will go alone, with God alone." Lady Beltham made a mighty effort to disguise the emotion she felt. Slowly she went down the steps and entered the sanctuary, where she halted in a state of terror. The choir was lit up. The tapers were flaring on the high altar, and in the middle of the chapel, wrapped in a large black cloak, his face hidden by a black mask, stood a man, mysterious and alarming. "Lady Beltham!" At the sound of his voice, Lady Beltham fancied she recognized her lover. "What do you want? What are you doing? It is madness." "Nothing is madness in Fantomas." Lady Beltham pressed her hands to her heart, unable to speak. The voice resumed. "Fantômas bids you leave here, Lady Beltham. In 2 hours you will go from this convent. A closed motor will be waiting for you at the back of the garden at the little gate. The vehicle will take you to a seaport, where you will board a vessel which the driver will indicate. When the voyage is over you will be in England. There you will receive fresh orders to make for Canada." Lady Beltham wrung her hands in despair. "Why do you wish to force me to leave my dear companions?" "Were you not ready to leave everything, Lady Beltham, to make a new life for yourself with him you love?" "Alas!" "Remember last Tuesday night at the Newley mansion." "Ah, you should have carried me off then, not left me time to think it over. Now I am no longer willing." "You will go, yes or no? Will you obey?" "I will, for after all, I love you." The two tragic beings were silent for a moment, listening. Outside the church, the uproar grew in violence. Brief orders were being shouted, a blowing of whistles. Suddenly, uttering a hoarse cry, the ruffian exclaimed: "The police! The police are on the track of Fantômas! Juve's police! Well, this time Fantômas will be too much for them. Lady Beltham, till we meet again!" Beating a rapid retreat behind a pillar of the chapel, he vanished. Lady Beltham found herself alone in the chapel. 5 minutes later, the heavy steps of the police sounded in the passages. They went through the house, searching for clues, then disappeared in the darkness of the night. Lady Beltham addressed the nuns: "A great peril threatens our sisters of the Boulevard Jourdan. They must be warned at all costs and at once. And it is necessary that I, and I only, should go to warn them. Have no fear, no harm will happen to me. I know what I am doing." Under the appalled eyes of the sisterhood, the Mother Superior slowly passed from the assembled community with a sweeping gesture of farewell. The moment she was gone, she ran to the far end of the garden, and passed through the little gate in the wall behind the chapel. She was gone. While these strange occurrences were in progress at the peaceful convent of Nogent, and the flight of Lady Beltham at the bidding of Fantômas was effected under the eyes of the sisters, no little stir was manifest in the environs of La Chapelle, in the dreaded region where the hooligans, forming the celebrated gang of Cyphers, have their haunts. A certain misrule reigned in the confederation, due to the fact that Loupart had not been seen for some time. None of its members believed for an instant the newspaper story that Loupart had turned out to be Fantômas, the elusive superhuman, the improbable, the weird Fantomas. This was beyond them. Good enough to stuff the numbskull of the law with such a tale, but there was no use for it among the gang of Cyphers. That same evening there was considerable excitement at the station in the rue Stevenson. Detectives, inspectors, real or sham hooligans, were assembled there. "Who is that gentleman?" asked Monsieur Rouquelet, the commissary of the district, pointing to a young man seated in a corner of the room taking notes on a pad. Juve, to whom the query was addressed, turned his head. "Why, it's Fandor, Jérôme Fandor, my friend." Juve was seated at the magistrate's table, comparing papers, documents, and material evidence. He had standing round him men in uniform or mufti. One might have thought it the office of a general staff during a battle. The door opened to a man dressed like a market gardener. "Well, Léon?" asked Juve. "Monsieur Inspector, it is done. We have nabbed the Cooper." A sergeant of the 19th Arrondissement appeared and saluted. "Monsieur Inspector, my men are bringing in the Flirt. Her throat is cut." "Is her murderer taken?" "Not yet. There are several of them, but we know them. The wounded woman was able to tell us their names. They bled her because they suspected her of giving us information." Monsieur Rouquelet telephoned to La Riboussaye for an ambulance, and the officers went to see the victim, who was lying on a stretcher in the hall. At that moment, the sound of a struggle hurried Juve to the entrance of the station. Some officers were hauling in a youth with a pallid complexion and wicked eyes. Fandor recognized the captive. "It's that little collegian who bit my finger the night of the Marseille Express." Léon, who had drawn near, likewise identified the youth. "I know him. That's Mimile. His account is settled. He is jugged." The hall of the station filled once more. An old woman, dragged in forcibly, was groaning and bawling at the top of her voice. "Pack of swine! Isn't it shameful to treat a poor woman so?" "Monsieur Superintendent," explained one of the men, "we caught this woman, Mother Toulouche, in the act of stowing away in her bodice a bundle of banknotes, just passed to her by a man. Here they are." The constable handed the packet to the magistrate, and Fandor, who was watching, could not repress an exclamation. "Oh, notes and halves! Suppose they belong to Monsieur Martial? Allow me, Monsieur Rouquelet, to look at the numbers." "In with Mother Toulouche!" cried the superintendent. Then, rubbing his hands, he turned to Juve and cried: "A fine haul, Monsieur Inspector! What do you think?" But Juve did not hear him. He had drawn Fandor into a corner of the office and was explaining: "I have done no more at present than have Lady Beltham shadowed. But I do not mean to arrest her. You see, if I asked Fuselier for a warrant against Lady Beltham, a person legally dead and buried more than 2 months ago, that excellent functionary would swallow his clerk, stool and all, in sheer amazement." At that moment a cyclist constable, dripping with sweat and quite out of breath, came in, and hastening straight to Juve, cried:
"I came from Nugent."
"Well?"
"Well, Monsieur Inspector, they saw a masked man come out of the convent, wrapped in a big cloak. They gave chase. He fired a revolver twice and killed 2 officers."
"Good God! It was certainly..."
"We thought, too, that perhaps after all it was Fantômas."
"Juve," called the Commissary, "you are wanted on the telephone. Newley is asking for you." The detective picked up the receiver. "Hello! Hello! Is that you, Michel? Yes? What is it? In a motor? Oh, you have taken the driver? But he... Curse it! Who the devil is this man who always escapes us? What? He is in Lady Beltham's house? You have surrounded the house? Good! Keep your eyes open. Do nothing till I come." Juve hung up the receiver and turned to Fandor. "Fantômas is at Lady Beltham's, shut up in the house. I am going there."
"I'll go with you." As the 2 men left the station, they were met by Inspector Grola. "We have taken the beard at Daddy Corn's," he cried.
"Confound that!" shouted Juve as he jumped into a taxi with Fandor. "Newley, Boulevard Inkermann, and top speed!"
End of Chapter 33. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California. shaggybark.blogspot.com. Of The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Souvestre. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Don W. Jenkins. Chapter 34. Fantomas' Revenge. Phew! Here I am. Checking his headlong course at the top of the terrace steps, Fantomas rapidly entered the house, then double-locked himself in. The ruffian at once inspected the fastenings of the windows and doors on the ground floor. The monster cocked his ear. 3 calls of the horn sounded dolefully in the silence of the night. Fantomas counted them anxiously, and then exclaimed: "There! That's my signal! My driver is taken!" A slight shudder shook the sturdy frame of the man. He went up to the first floor and peered through the shutters. He caught the sound of footsteps. In the light of a street lamp he suddenly descried the outline of his driver. The latter, among half a score of policemen, was walking, head bent, with his hands fettered. "Poor fellow!" he murmured. "Another who has to pay! Ah! They have left my 60 horse for my use presently. But there is no time to lose. I'll bet that Juve, flanked by his everlasting journalist, will not be long in coming here. Very well. Juve, it is not as master that you will enter this house, but as a doomed man." Fantômas now became absorbed in a strange task which claimed all his attention. On the floor of the dark closet where all the electric gear of the house terminated, the bandit laid a sort of oblong fusee that he drew from his capacious cloak. He fitted to the end of this fusee 2 electric wires previously freed of their insulator. Then, having verified the tie of the pulls of the distribution board, he hid the cartridge under a lid of wood. Then he left the closet, taking care to double lock the door. "Those detectives," he growled, "are about to witness the finest firework display imaginable, and, I dare say, to take part in it too. Dynamite can transform a respectable middle class house into a sparkling bouquet of loose stone." Such was, indeed, the fearful reception Fantômas held in reserve for his opponents. He had made everything ready to blow up the house and escape unhurt himself. If Juve and Fandor had paid more attention to the piping of the wires, they would have seen that some of them ran outside the house and disappeared below ground, reappearing at the far end of the property in an old deserted woodshed. Fantômas was about to leave the house. He was already stepping onto the terrace when, suppressing an oath, he wheeled about suddenly. As Juve and Fandor were about to enter the grounds, Detective Michel rose up out of the dusk. "That you, sir?"
"Well," replied Juve, "is the bird in the nest?"
"Yes, sir. The cage is well guarded, I assure you. 15 of my men kept a strict guard round the house."
"Good. Here is the plan of action. You, sergeant, will enter the house with Inspector Michel at my back. The men will continue to watch the exit."
Juve broke off sharply. He saw the door of the house open a little way and Fantômas appear, then vanish again inside the house.
"At last!" cried Juve, who sprang forward, followed by Fandor. "Slowly, gentlemen. We now have victory in sight. We mustn't imperil it by rashness. You remain on the ground floor, each one in a room, and don't stir without a good reason. I am going up." "I am going with you!" exclaimed Fandor. The two went cautiously up the stairs to the first floor. "Fantomas!" challenged Juve, halting on the landing. "You are caught! Surrender!" But the detective's voice only roused distant echoes. The big house was silent. "Now this is what we must do," he cautioned Fandor. "Above us is a loft. We will search it first. If it is empty, we will close it again. Then we will come down again, taking each room in turn and locking it after us. At the slightest sound, fling yourself on the ground and let Fantomas fire first. The flash of the shot will tell us where it comes from." The two manhunters searched the loft without success. At the first floor, Juve suppressed a slight tremor, for the handle of the door leading into Lady Beltham's room creaked ominously. He opened it, springing aside quickly, expecting to be fired at. The room was empty, no trace of Fantomas. The two passed into another room, then, as soon as their visitation was completed, locked up the apartment. Suddenly, as they reached the foot of the stairs, Juve gave a violent start. From the door of the drawing room, a shadow, black from head to foot, came bounding out. Quick as lightning, the form crossed the ante room, then plunged by a low entrance into the cellarage. 2 shots rang out. Fantomas drew behind him a big bar and prided himself on the barrier he thus put between his pursuers and himself. But despite his consummate confidence, he was beginning to feel a certain uneasiness, an undeniable anxiety. His black mask clung to his temples, dripping with sweat. He crossed the basement to the little air hole overlooking the garden. "That is a way of escape," he thought, "unless..." But baffled, he ceased his inspection. "Curse it, there are 3 policemen before that exit." He scraped a match and reviewed the place in which he found himself, which, for that matter, he knew better than anyone. Facing him stood the dilapidated stove, and at its feet shimmered the cistern. All at once, Fantomas clenched his fists. Under the increasing blows of the detective and his men, the door of the basement yielded. Above the crash of the boards and ironwork, Juve's voice rang out: "Fantomas, surrender!" Fantomas groped in the darkness. His hand came on a bottle. A crackle of shattered glass was heard. Fantomas had taken the bottle by the neck and broken it against the wall. Juve, revolver in hand, followed by Fandor, moved cautiously down the stairs to the cellar. Both men were brave, yet they felt their hearts beating as though they would burst. Juve reached the last step. He pressed the knob of his electric torch. A rush of light lit up the little room. It was empty. Juve went the round of the cellar, carefully inspecting the walls and sounding them with the butt of his revolver. He went round the cistern. Its surface was black and still. A broken bottle, floating head downward, remained half immersed, absolutely motionless. Fandor laid his hand on the detective's arm. "Did you hear? Someone breathed." Beyond doubt, someone had breathed. "Idiots that we are, he is in there!" cried Juve, pointing to the pipe of the great stove. The detective caught sight in a corner of a number of bundles of straw. "That is what we want, Fandor. We are going to make a bonfire." When the opening of the furnace was fitted, Juve set a light to it, and the flames rose, crackling, while up the pipe of the heater rose a pungent smoke, thick and black. "And now to the openings of the stove. Sergeant! Michel! This way!" Through the apertures in the ground floor rooms, the great stove was beginning to smoke. A broken bottle, with the bottom gone, was floating head downward in the black water of the tank. Scarcely had Juve and Fandor gone than the water was stirred, and slowly the mysterious bottle rose again to the top. Behind it rose the head of Fantomas, still wrapped in the black hood, which now clung to his face like a mask moulded on the features. Dripping, he issued from the tank and breathed hard for some moments. Despite his ingenious contrivance for feeding his lungs, he was not far from suffocating. "All the same," he growled, "if I hadn't remembered the plan of the Tonkinese, who lie stretched at the bottom of a river for hours at a time, breathing through hollow reeds, I think that time we should have exchanged shots to some purpose." Fantomas was wringing out his garments in haste, when loud cries sounded above his head, and 2 or 3 shots rang out. At the same time, a sudden stirring took place in and around the house. He turned it to account by going at once to the air hole. Now there was no one on guard, so Fantômas put his head through, then his shoulders. "That's all right, the brute is dead." Juve was examining curiously the creature which lay helpless on the floor. Two trembling sergeants stood at the door of the room. "We were expecting Fantômas to appear, and a snake unrolls itself and springs in our faces!" cried Fandor. Half emerging from the mouth of the heater, the monstrous body of a boa constrictor lay on the floor. The men Juve had brought into the house were resolute, ripe for anything, but never did they imagine that Fantômas could assume such an unexpected shape. And terrified, overwhelmed with dread, they recoiled in a frenzy of fear and fled, calling on their mates outside, who at once ran to their assistance. "Sir!" a terrified voice called from outside. Juve rushed to the window. A dripping creature, clad in black from head to foot, crossed the garden, running toward the servants' quarters. It was Fantômas! Juve swore a great oath. "There he is, getting away!" The detective left his cry unfinished. As he issued by the air holes, Fantômas leaped forward. He was free. "Juve scored the first game, the second is mine!" he cried. He reached the woodshed. With a practised hand he turned the electric tap which ignited a spark in the dark closet behind the pantry. "I win!" shouted Fantômas as a terrible explosion made itself heard. The earth shook. A huge column of black smoke rose skywards. Explosion followed explosion. The roar of falling walls was mingled with fearful cries and dying groans. Lady Beltham's villa had been blown up, burying under its ruins the hapless men who in their pursuit of Fantômas had ventured too near. Assuredly, this arch criminal had got away once more. But were Juve and Fandor among the dead? End of Chapter 34. End of The Exploits of Juve by Marcel Allain and Pierre Silvestre. Read by Don W. Jenkins, Rancho San Diego, California, shaggybark.blogspot.com.